Every organization and everybody I speak to is dealing with tremendous change and adversity. So how do you actually overcome that? Well, to help us explore that topic in more detail, somebody who knows a little bit about adversity and resilience is Roger Crawford, a good buddy of mine. We've known each other for decades. I convinced him to be on the episode today, and we are live right now on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube and a few other places. So this is Roger Crawford. If you're listening on the podcast, you can find him at rogercrawford.com. He's a best-selling author. He is a Hall of Fame keynote speaker. But more than that, he's an agent of change for organizations where he goes in and he helps them really reframe their mindset to really use their talents. But he's got a unique story. So Roger, welcome to today's episode of Fordify. Tell our listeners and viewers, who are you and how did you get into this whole thing to become somebody who helps people with resilience and change?
Yeah, thank you, Ford. You know, you're a cherished friend, and I'm just thrilled to be on your podcast. Thank you for the invitation. Ford, I started speaking when I got out of college. I was a collegiate athlete. I played tennis. Well, a lot of people play tennis, but I was born with a physical challenge that probably some people would think, you know, tennis might not be the best sport for you to pursue. I have 2 fingers on my left hand, 1 finger on my right hand. I had an underdeveloped left leg amputated when I was 5 years old, and I have 3 toes on my right foot. Now, that seems like a disadvantage growing up. But, you know, I was very fortunate that I had parents that instilled in me very, very early in my life, no excuses. My dad used to tell me this, Ford. He used to say, you don't live in Pity City. And something that I share with audiences is that if we want to increase results, it's important that we decrease excuses. So I did not grow up thinking that I was disadvantaged, because I think when you adopt that mindset, then you start to become a victim instead of a victor. So I didn't really look at myself as disadvantaged, but I was differently abled. And, you know, that's true for everybody, don't you think? I mean, nobody is gifted in every area of our life, but all of us are gifted in some area of our life. So when I was playing tennis, Ford, I held onto the racket with 2 hands. And then I'd pin the grip to my right elbow. When I mean pin, I'd take my left hand and hold the grip to my right elbow. So that's how I learned how to play tennis. Now, I wasn't the most powerful and I wasn't the fastest, but here's what I learned on the tennis court. If you can hit the ball over the net one more time than your opponent, you win the point. And think about business today. Isn't that true? Right?
It is true. And you didn't just play tennis, though. I mean, you're being modest. I mean, just for those of you that don't know Roger, if you've ever seen him speak on stages around the globe, you know, he is just as humble and nice off stage as he is on stage. And his whole mindset, no matter we're in Speakers Roundtable together, no matter what's going on in the organization, no matter what challenges are being faced, Roger's always someone who comes in with the perfect thing to say that doesn't just wash it over. It's not like, oh, there's nothing going on, but to reset the belief system. That's why I love your books. I love, listening to you when you're on stage. But you didn't just play tennis. Like, you're being kind of modest here. Keep going with your story so that they really understand.
Sure.
And for those who didn't hear it as he started the episode, you're talking, very limited hand, not real hands, right? You got toes on just a few fingers. And then you only had 1 leg, which is really, I'm going to do a detour here for a second. So Roger was at an event with me. We were both on stage together and we were on a panel together, and he crosses his leg. And he had a prosthetic leg, and I've known him. I'd known him at that point for like 8 years, and I've seen him walk, I've seen him run, and I'm like, Roger, I had no idea that you only had 1 leg. And then that was where he said, look, I don't see myself as unabled, I'm abled. So anyway, little detour there. Right. So you started to play tennis. It wasn't really your sport. Your parents instilled with you that you should have a proper mindset. And then what did you do then?
So I played tennis in high school, and I had some success there and started to get some notoriety. I had achieved a ranking and so forth. And then I went to Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, which was Division I college tennis. And that was really the vision I had for my life, was to play Division I. That was my ultimate goal. And it's interesting, Ford, I have people often say to me, did you ever participate in the Paralympics or anything like that?
Right.
When I was growing up, there was no such thing.
Right.
So I was competing against able-bodied people. And when I look back on that, I do believe it gets down to that mindset of not viewing myself as less than. I said earlier about being disadvantaged. I hear that from people today. They feel like, the economy's against them, or they weren't born to the right family, or they had this obstacle growing up. The truth is that everybody is going to face adversity. It's important when I stand in front of a group, something I say to them is, look, my life's not different than your life. I'm not here to tell you that the challenges that I faced are more overwhelming or daunting than you have. I'm not saying that because I may not be able to see the challenges that they're facing. I mean, something I've shared with audiences for years is this: challenges in life, that's inevitable, but defeat's optional. See, that's volitional. That's our choice to be defeated. But adversity is going to happen. And don't you think that life runs a lot more smoothly when we accept that fact that we're going to have bumps in the road? We're just going to. And so the question is, how do we transcend that adversity? And how does we let that adversity make us better tomorrow than we were today? And I think it gets down to mindset. Mindset is the single best predictor of success, I believe. Because, Ford, I'd like people to think about this. We very rarely, if ever, perform better than we believe we can. I mean, haven't you noticed that if people believe that they cannot do something that is unattainable, they're going to look for evidence to support that negative mindset?
Yeah, they certainly do.
Because, if you have self-belief, right, you're going to work really hard at proving yourself right. In the same respect, if you believe that you're incapable, you don't have the capacity to achieve, you're going to work really hard at proving yourself right. See, so the better that we choose to think, I think the better results that we get. But we were back to tennis for a moment. So I played tennis throughout college, and then I started my speaking career, primarily speaking to high school students. And Ford, when somebody asks me, how can you learn how to be an effective speaker and how do you do it quickly? Here's what I say to them.
Yeah.
Go into a high school Friday afternoon, last period of the day, with a lousy microphone system. That'll teach you how to speak.
In high school, students are the worst audiences, or not worst, but hardest, excuse me,
Right.
for those listening.
But what I did was it gave me what we've talked about in Speakers Roundtable. It gave me stage time.
Yeah.
It gave me an ability to get up in front of a group and work on my craft. Because something that I like to pride myself on, and something that I think about quite often, is I want people to look at me as a speaker that happens to have a physical challenge versus a physically challenged speaker. I mean, my story doesn't dominate the message. I use it as a backdrop.
Sure, it helps people remember the message, but that's never been what your message is about, right?
Right. I mean, I think inspirational stories, I think there is value to that. However, it's temporary. If you can give the audience some life principles that they can then take and apply in their life, that's what I think is effective communication. It's not someone's story. Now, granted, I would use that as a backdrop, as I mentioned earlier, but it doesn't drive the message.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm curious. So, whenever I interview organizations, when I'm going to speak, we all do those pre-event calls. I just had one yesterday, and I always ask them, what are the top 3 challenges facing your organization? And if you've listened to my podcast before, I say this a lot on the podcast because it's always relevant to whoever the guest is. And inevitably, the answers I get are, we want to leverage our staff more effectively. We want to reduce turnover. We want to improve engagement. we want to improve the customer experience, or they're on the business side, they just want to get more business, which is, of course, my lane is how do I get the phone to ring? How do I get more people in my retail locations? How do I engage more customers to spend more and add more value? It's that kind of thing. So when it comes to the team part of it, the leadership part, which obviously I do, presentations that have leadership messages in them, because in order to grow a company, you have to have leadership. But one of the things that you really do is you talk about those principles. So I want you to think about the challenges that organizations are facing today, with multiple generations in the marketplace, huge turnover. People are getting advanced in their career because they're the last person standing. So they just get motivated by trial, right? Right. So what are some principles that our listeners can do? If they're listening or watching this today, what are some principles that they can use?
Well, number one, something that is universal in business today is change. Along with challenge, change is inevitable. Oftentimes we hear people say, I'll be a lot more positive when things get back to normal. Ford, I think that in the world we live in today, that saying back to normal is really obsolete. Normal is ahead of us and not behind us. So what mindset do we need to adopt? Well, I think it's this. Every day, never let acceptable in the way of exceptional. Always looking for ways to add value, to reach for that exceptional. Because we've all heard this saying, right? What brought you to where you are is not going to keep you where you are.
That's right.
And the velocity of change is increasing rapidly. I'll give you an example out of my own life. I mentioned having an artificial leg. I had an artificial leg for me made 7 years ago. Now, 7 years ago to me seems like yesterday. Okay. And how they manufactured my leg was they put a cast on my leg and formed it that way. Now they 3D printed it.
Oh, wow.
And I had it to try on that day. Wow. Now that's just a simple example of my extrapolate that over all businesses today. That velocity of change is not going to slow down. Now, I realize that change can be difficult because we're leaving the known and entering into the unknown.
Right.
And when we have anxiety over change, typically we're focused on what we believe we're going to lose instead of what we're going to gain. And when we get into that mindset of being afraid of what we're going to lose, I think it's important that we look at our past and we see what has manifested from change that we've experienced in our past. We can't live in the past, but we can learn from the past. And typically what people find when they look at change in their past is that it's created new opportunities, new possibilities. It's allowed them to do more and to be more. So the mindset or the principle would be this: we're not going back to normal. Normal's ahead of us, not behind us.
That's right.
Never let acceptable get in the way of exceptional. And I mentioned consistency. It's interesting, Ford. I played against a number of opponents that were what I would call flashy on the court. They had big shots. And every so often, man, they would hit this impressive winner. But then they'd make, out of 10, maybe 8 errors. But 2 shots would be spectacular. But what's interesting is, if you're consistent, you're going to end up defeating that person that only is 2 out of 10 spectacular. See, oftentimes, don't we look at that spectacular, we think that's success. And don't get me wrong, we should always strive for that.
Right.
But knowing that it's that consistency every single day. With the work I do at Tennis Channel, I had the opportunity of being in a room with Rafa Nadal. For those people listening that may not know who Rafa Nadal is, he's now at the end of his career, but he would be considered one of the, if not the greatest player ever, certainly top 5. And Ford, I'll never forget this. I'm sitting there and they're interviewing him, and I felt really fortunate because it's a small room with just a few people. what is your goal for this year? And I'm sitting there thinking, wow, this is going to be something flashy, right?
Right.
He's going to say, I want to win the US Open, or I want to win Wimbledon. Here's what he said, Ford: to have a good practice tomorrow. And the interviewer said, well, but what I really wanted to know was your year-long goal. I mean, what are you striving for? And he said, to have good practice tomorrow. And they said, that's it? He said, that's it. Because if I can have a good, effective practice tomorrow, then that's going to prepare me for success the next day. That's what I mean about consistency. And that's a mindset.
Yeah, it certainly is. I know, my story, grew up in the projects, and, I had a tough life, but not tough as, we're not comparing, I'm not comparing myself to people who've had much, much, much worse than me. I never missed a meal or anything, but, certainly, what changed my mind was my mindset was I got a cassette program, from Earl Nightingale called The Strangest Secret. And that was the first time that I'd ever gotten positive programming. And it was just amazing. My mind shift changed. There's that old quote, once your mind gets a new idea, it never regains the same shape or something like that. And it didn't. It started me on a path of learning and growing. And over the years, the more I've learned, the more I know I don't know. I know a lot, and I'm credited with, knowing a lot, but I'm also humble enough to know what I don't know. And I think what's really interesting about that principle that you just shared about being consistent was, for years growing up, I'd listen to audio programs, I'd go to seminars, and I'd hire coaches. And, a lot of the theme was think big, right? Even my license plate, when I first got my Jeep Rubicon, the license plate, my vanity license plate says think big, THINKBG. And then I realized that I didn't realize I was listening to a podcast, I think with Charlie Plum, and I think it might be Jocko Willink or somebody else. I don't take credit for this, but they said, you need to think big, but you need to think small too. If you just think big, that's why people at the beginning of the year, they have these, I'm going to lose 50 pounds. I'm going to make this much money. I'm going to have a better relationship with my kids and my family. It's good to have the big goal, right? But what you just shared in that principle is it's also important to focus on what's the next step and be consistent with the next step. And so now, even on my phone, my screensaver on my phone, actually, if I can get rid of all the announcements on my phone and stop my phone for a second, it actually says, I'll hold it up to the camera. It says, think big, think small, take action, right? Because, I have to remember, I want to think big, and it's important to think it big and be good goals. But I think the principle you shared about being consistent and having, what is your daily action plan? And that's like when I work with organizations, I help them create that massive action plan. What are they going to do on a Wednesday morning at 9:00 when they're trying to engage their team, or when they're trying to get a new customer, or they're trying to build a relationship with a partner in the community? And so, that's a good principle. I think that consistency and some of these things, I want you to speak on the fact that, we can say this right now, you got to have a positive mindset. You got to be open-minded. You have to, but to actually take that step when you get up in the morning and your brain says, no, I just want to go back to sleep. What can you tell our listeners that compel you to keep moving forward, even in challenges? I mean, I've had some challenges come up recently in my business, and, thank God I relied on my network of people and my success library, which I have behind me, to just reframe and refocus. Sometimes I'll just listen to a YouTube video or a TikTok on something positive. I was listening to Matthew McConaughey, 6 Lessons for Life, and I'm like, man, if I just lived by 1/5 of those lessons, it'd be good. So the one principle is being consistent. I know I've taken over the show, but I want to go back to you. What's another principle that you share with organizations when they bring you in?
Well, Ford, I certainly want to share that, but also want to piggyback on something you had to say. You talked a little bit about your life growing up, and I've known you quite some time, and I know some of that adversity that you've walked through. And what's interesting is I'm sure there are many, many people that you grew up with that were in the same circumstances, that their life is in a much different place than yours.
Yeah, there are. Yes, absolutely.
And you think, so circumstances really defined their life, but circumstances didn't define your life. And why was that? Well, it gets down to mindset. And, You asked me what principles would I share with audiences that can help them get up in the morning and keep going and stay motivated and stay inspired. I think first and foremost, it's this. It's clarity. Being crystal clear on what you want to accomplish every single day. Clarity. Clarity is what gives our vision its cutting edge, because oftentimes we set goals, and I think goals are important. Goals are cerebral. Goals are something we wrap our mind around. When we have clarity, that requires an emotional commitment to something. Clarity, I think, is different than goals. Okay.
Yes, I would
Goals
agree.
are a way of measuring our progress, but clarity is really our vision. So what is it? What is it that you want to accomplish? Number one. Number two, and I think this is critically important, accepting what you cannot change and focusing on what you can change. When I was growing up, I desperately wanted new hands. I was obsessed with it. I thought, I was probably in my early teens. I just wanted new hands. I just wanted to be like everybody else. And for it, I could not find the courage to take my hands out of my pockets. Why was that? Well, I was afraid. I was afraid of rejection. I didn't want kids to stare at me. Well, I got a new pair of hands. And, I say, I don't know what people do with 10 fingers, honestly. I mean, they were, I put them on and poking myself in the eye and everything. I'm like, this is like a waste, frankly. I don't think everybody needs 10 fingers, but that's just my opinion.
Right.
But I wore the hands. It didn't change my mindset.
Interesting.
It didn't. So circumstances changed, but the mind didn't.
Right.
Here's what changed is when I had a teacher say, you'll never reach higher with your hands in your pockets. Wow. And all of a sudden, the world kind of opened up to me, because I realized at that moment that what was holding me back was not my hands. It was how I was experiencing having 3 fingers. In other words, I wasn't going to change this. Okay. But what could I change? I could change the meaning that I attached to having 3 fingers. Now, I'll give you a simple story. When I was younger, people would stare at me. Here's how I looked at it. Negative. Rejection. I'm an outcast. Now, today, people still stare at me.
Yep.
You know what I think? They're curious. See, I don't look at it as negative. They're just curious. It's amazing how just reframing that just took my life to a different level. And the reason I say that, Ford, is I meet people all the time that are fixated on what they cannot change. And I look at that and I think, I'm never going to be a great piano player. I'm never going to be as handsome as Ford Saeks. I just got to accept that, right? No, but you know what I mean. But I see people all the time, or I listen to people all the time, and they keep working at changing something that's unchangeable. So what is it? What can you influence in your life? The next principle that I would say is people often underestimate themselves.
Yes. I think we all, I certainly
they
do.
overestimate
Yeah.
others.
Yeah, we all do.
Because they overestimate others. They think, well, that person's got it together.
Yep.
Right. But I don't. Here's the truth of the matter, Ford, is that we all are much more courageous, much more capable than we give ourselves credit for. And one way that we can begin to meet our expectations and fulfill our capacity, what we're actually capable of, is letting go of those self-imposed limitations. Just absolutely reframing that and saying, you know what? Here's some things in my life that are not changeable, but here are some things that are changeable. Here is where I'm good. Here's where I'm gifted. In tennis, we call it the sweet spot. On the racket, the tennis racket, there's one space that is a sweet spot. And when you hit it, you have maximum velocity and maximum control. True in our life as well. You work within your sweet spot, maximum impact, maximum velocity, and the most control.
Yeah, I think it's so profound and so simple. One of the things I shifted was instead of saying I can't, to say I get to, or instead of I have to, I get to, instead of I can't, I can. And I know that seems kind of simple, but for our listeners out there and viewers, try that. Try it for a week. When you are faced with a question, or if you're around people that are always negative, and we all have those people that 10 minutes around them want to go take a bath because they're just carrying the weight of the world, or the economy, the political situation, the environment, the global issues that are going on. And those are all important things. I'm not saying you shouldn't participate and help make the world a better place, but I also think you have to clean up your own backyard before you worry about the neighborhood, right? You've got to take care of a assessment of where you are now. And, something I got from Les Brown years ago was start where you are with what you've got. So regardless of where you are in business and life and relationships, in leadership or management or change or culture, start where you are with what you have and look at how can I improve on my key talents that I need to develop? How do I hire my weaknesses? And how do I create a consistent plan? I mean, one of the things I've had to do is I keep my desk clean. I have a clean calendar. I have a stack of, to do in one place, but I've learned that over the years, the more I remove the distractions and set up my environment and turn off my alarms on my devices and my alerts, unless they're absolutely necessary alerts, I've found that I'm able to focus more. And we all, have those days where, if most people work 9 to 5 during the week, I mean, I know some people work on the weekends, of course, but I find that if I, in the past, if I worked on a Saturday, I'd be really productive. Well, why? Because I was focused. I didn't allow the distractions of life to take over. And now I've worked on developing my life to be that way, whether it's a podcast episode, Wednesdays, 11 a.m. Central, like we're doing today, I have it scheduled, the guest comes in the green room 15 minutes earlier. We check the sound, the mic, and the cameras, and then we go live. Right. And and sometimes it works out, and sometimes the dog barks, and sometimes the internet gets cut off. But I do appreciate it. And I want to just tell our listeners as we're midway through here, please go like and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can like and rate everything. And of course, if you're watching this on your favorite streaming platform, like and subscribe so you get notified of upcoming episodes. Okay, there's my little plug. This message is brought to you by Roger Crawford from rogercrawford.com. Okay, so Roger, you've been helping inspire audiences for years. Mindset is a huge piece, resilience and change. You talked about the velocity of change and how it all starts with the mindset, and you gave us some specific tactics. What else? Think about those people that in organizations that, one bad apple can spoil the whole bunch. What does a leader do if they've got a team member that's toxic or negative and isn't really getting on the same page? And sometimes it's the leader. So for those organizations listening, sometimes it's not. Right. Sometimes it's not the team, because it's been me. I've been that toxic person. And I had a sporting goods company, grew it up to 140 employees, but I had a lot of turnover in the management. In the warehouse, I never had any because I really wasn't dealing with the warehouse people. But in the front office, I had turnover, and I was toxic. I mean, I didn't understand it at the time. I was a driver. I was direct. I had a low empathy. I cared about the result, and I just wanted to get the result done. So sometimes I was a little bit rough around the edges, and I've even had that even with current team members. So what do you do in an organization where there's a misalignment of mindset and they need to, because I know you work with executive boards, you come in strategically to help them make better decisions. Where do you start when you can clearly see the picture, because you've been seeing it for so long, like you can look at it and you go, okay, this is the problem. What do you tell those organizations to do, or those people?
Well, I think, Ford, the first step is alignment. It is making sure that everybody on your team has a clear understanding of where you're going. It's interesting to me that I often meet leaders that they believe that just because they understand where they're going, how they're going to get there, that everybody understands it. And I find that oftentimes companies are not in alignment because the leader hasn't been able to communicate with authenticity where they're going. That's number one. Number two, it's making sure that everybody on their team feels that they have a contribution to make and a responsibility to fulfill. Because if people don't understand, if people don't feel like they make a difference, if people don't feel like they're contributing to this vision for the company, it's very easy for them to lose motivation, lose inspiration, and frankly, their mindset goes elsewhere. So I think those are two ideas. The third thing is you need to model behavior that you want. I've been in meetings, and I know you have too, Ford, where, you listen to a leader and this leader saying, we're going to go here and we've got these goals. And then they start talking very pessimistic about something. And they're not modeling that mindset that they want for their people that are following them, for their team members. And I think I think part of this is social media, but people very easily can get sucked in to negativity. And so much of it, Ford, I think is a false narrative. Because if people want to find an excuse, they're going to find it. And it's not going to be that hard. They're going to be able to point to this situation or that situation. So what can you communicate to your team about their contribution? What can they do? And the final piece and I've said this already before, but it's this idea of being authentic. Being authentic. And what I mean by authentic is having humanity. And you sometimes meet leaders that they don't want to admit any vulnerability. They're afraid to be human, to say, you know what, I'm struggling too. Or, hey, this is the way that I've been successful, or I've overcome this adversity or that adversity. I think it resonates with people when you have a leader that has humanity. I've seen that many, many times. Leading people is not easy, Ford. It's not easy. But I do believe that the world has changed. We talked about that earlier. However, there are still basic principles that in this fast-paced, ever-changing, technology-driven world that have worked yesterday and are going to work tomorrow. Just these basic principles.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And I think that for those listening, you can always better your best, right? Just like, the expert that you interviewed, I'm going to have a good practice tomorrow. For me, right. I work on my communication skills, my ability to understand the different styles, the behavior styles that people have so that their needs can be met, because everybody's different and how their needs get met. The difference of the generations between Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, traditionalists, boomers, the connected generation, and whatever the newest alphabet soup is of generations. In reality, it just means adaptability and understanding and valuing the other mindsets. For me, I was always a driver, and then I realized that, in an accounting person, I needed someone who was very analytical, and they weren't necessarily very social, but they were very smart, very educated, and they followed systems. And sure. I found out that if I didn't create systems and processes for them, then they weren't successful. Because money's a short-term motivator. Everybody wants to earn more money. Everybody wants to make more money in whatever career job you are, whether you want to give it back philanthropy or not. You want to earn, right? You want to contribute. And so it always came back down to there's no such thing as job security, only skill security. And if there's right. opportunity out there if you're willing to apply yourself. So wherever you are in this, you're listening now or viewing this, whatever position you're in, whatever role you're in, whether you're an owner, a private equity company, a CEO, CIEIO, hooked on phonics, reference that no one will understand just now. I just lost half the audience with that. But we can always better our best. And when people in marketing always ask me, well, is it B2B or B2C? And I always tell them it's people to people. At the end of the day, I've had the opportunity to interview experts like you and leaders in their fields. and I listen to their mindset. And one of the reasons I do these episodes is I get my weekly fix, right? I'm speaking with experts every single week. And so selfishly, I'm learning. I'm rethinking. Yeah, I haven't been very consistent. One of the things you mentioned that I didn't say, I play poker on Friday nights with a group of guys, just a little friendly home game. And I'm that guy who looks for that wild shot, right? I'm looking for that flashy shot. And then we've got a couple guys that are consistent. They play the odds. They don't play very many hands, and they win consistently. When I win really big, right? And so it's an interesting concept, because I'm that tennis player who's looking for those 2 out of 20 shots that I'm going to win, and I'm losing 18 hands, right? So I might change my philosophy on Friday, and I think that the people I play with are probably going to be really shocked, because they're like, "Why aren't you playing hit cards?" But I think in business it's the same thing. I mean, you have to continually decide to reevaluate your circumstances and to feed your mind. You didn't get where you are, Roger, with the adversity you've overcome without really practicing and living those principles. As you go forward, what are some books or podcasts or people that you follow, mentors that inspire you?
I think that's a great question, because Ford, when I heard you talking about how, doing these podcasts, how, it helps you learn or be reminded of what you already know. It's interesting. I have been a full-time speaker for 40 years. Okay.
He started when he was 4, everybody.
Right. And what's interesting is I learn something new every day about motivation, mindset, whatever. And oftentimes it's like a different perspective of what maybe I already understood, or this principle, or a new way of applying it. I'm a huge fan of Les Brown, who you mentioned. I love listening to Les. He's been a friend and a mentor for a long time. I listen to a variety of different podcasts, and they're not necessarily motivational, but they all are giving me some information that I wasn't aware of before. Maybe it's information on organization or on exercise, metabolism, all of that, because I think it's important for all of us, because the world is changing rapidly. But even if it wasn't changing as rapidly as it is, change is going to happen, that we're lifelong learners. Because how many people do you meet, Ford? I know I have, and they get to a certain age and they think, well, I've heard it all, I've learned it all.
Right. And they say, I went to college. I'm like, yeah, the day you graduated, everything you learned was outdated. I mean, hypothetically, I don't want to.
Exactly right.
But yeah, you have to continually learn. It's not just the learning. I've hired some really smart people that have all the degrees and letters after their names, but they weren't critical thinkers. And then I've hired some people that don't have any of those things, but they're a critical thinker. And what I mean by critical thinker, for those that I'm throwing that word around, is it just means not just accepting everything at face value, to use critical thought. Why do you think that way? What references? It's like I'll do sales coaching, right? And I'll say, hey, Roger, how's business? Oh, business is really down, Ford. And I say, well, Roger, what have you done? Well, I've done a lot. And I said, Roger, what'd you do? Well, I've been making sales calls, but it's just tough out there. So, Roger, how many calls did you make? I made 2, right? And again, we're talking hypothetically, this is not Roger, but I'm just saying, you have to dig down to critical thinking. Means, okay, what makes you think that way? What evidence supports that? And there's no shortage of evidence that supports having a proper mindset, being a continual learner, being open-minded, being, surrounding yourself with people that are like-minded, or mentors, or books, or coaching, or webinars, or mentorships, where you can actually get challenged on your thinking. And I think we all need those people like you, because you'll come up to me and you'll go, Ford, I was listening to you when you were in your team meeting the other day. Maybe you should do this. And so Roger's always been a friend to me to give me those insights. And we need people around us that can do that. And so regardless of where you get your concepts from, maybe you're listening to this episode, great if you agree with us. If you don't agree with us, put it in the comments and let us know why. Because I'd really like to know the thinking behind the behavior.
And Ford, you bring up a really, really good point about critical thinking. I am a believer in the power of a positive mindset. However, it's important that people don't confuse critical thinking with negative thinking. It's not the same thing.
It's not.
Not the
Definitely.
same thing. And critical thinking is absolutely crucial in the world we live in today. We must continue to evaluate, reassess. I know for me, I continually look at videos of presentations I've given and think about ways that I might improve it, make it a little bit better, because audiences have changed. Audiences have changed. I mean, I've gotten a bit older. They seem to have gotten a bit younger. They relate to different things than I do. They had different experiences growing up than I did. So it's my job to serve the audience in the best way that I can. And that's by being a continual learner, continuing to grow and expand. And because when you're up there speaking, you're very transparent. And I've often said to people, you can fool an audience for a short period of time, but they're going to figure it out. If this is something that you really don't believe in your heart, or you're not practicing in your own life, it's going to be pretty evident. And so, I feel standing in front of a stage is such an immense privilege that I don't take for granted. And every presentation I give, I want to make sure that I'm giving it my absolutely very best. And I'm fully prepared. That way I can give the audience the most value. Because I've often believed this, Ford, I'm sorry, I do,
No,
but I've often believed this, that audiences don't remember everything you said, but they do remember everything they heard. And here's the distinction. So I am standing in front of a group and I'm speaking, and the audiences cannot not necessarily relate to having 3 fingers, 1 leg, and half a foot, but they can relate to being afraid.
Right.
They can relate to resistance of change. They can relate to overcoming challenges. So what they hear might be much different than what I say, but they're going to remember what they heard.
So I had an interruption there, Roger. Sorry. Hey, real quick, as we get ready to wrap up this episode, I agree with you that one of the things that make us both Hall of Fame speakers. And so for those of you listening, we're in the Hall of Fame, which is a very elite group from the National Speakers Association. It's a Council of Peers Award, and it's been awarded, but there's only like 186 of us alive out of the thousands of people who are speakers. So we reached that echelon, and people always ask, well, what does it take to be a Hall of Fame keynote speaker? And I think that one of the traits that you and I both exhibit with audiences today is it's not about us. It's about our impact. We're measured based on our impact that we make for the audiences, and that they can be sure that if they bring either one of us in for a keynote or a breakout or a workshop or strategic advisement, that we're going to be timely, topical, and relevant. And that's why we've been able to have a career for decades. I didn't start 40 years ago, 34 years ago for me, but what I have to work on my craft daily, because this is a business that's easy to get into, but hard to stay in. Like there's a lot of speakers who are influencers, and they made their 15 minutes of fame, but what are they really going to offer an audience that's going to actually move the needles across the board? So Roger, thank you so much for joining me today. Any final thoughts? And stick around. I'm going to play an outro, and then we'll stick around for a second.
Great. No, Ford, listen, I just appreciate it. And like I said, I cherish your friendship and thrilled to be part of your podcast. Thanks, my friend.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Fordify Live. Make sure to like, comment, and share this episode on your favorite social media platform. And don't forget to subscribe to the Business Growth Show podcast, available wherever you get your podcast streaming fix. We air weekly at 11 a.m. Central Time. So until next week, keep pushing the boundaries and never stop growing.
Hey, Roger.